Welcome. My name is Caleb Ontiveros. I'm one of the founders of Stoa. In this conversation, I speak with Sharon Lebell. Sharon is the author of The Art of Happiness, which is one of the best modern introductions to Stoicism. There's so much to talk about, but let's start at the very beginning. What is your story?
What is my story? Well, I'm best known for being the author of the book, The Art of Living, right here, the classical manual on virtue, happiness, and effectiveness. And it's a popular, meaning for the people, meaning for every man or every woman, interpretation of the Stoic teachings of the great Stoic sage Epictetus. And I wrote this book quite a few decades ago, before I guess what you could call the Stoicism movement started to flourish. And I write about all kinds of philosophical topics. I do public speaking, and I'm a co-founder of the international philosophical community online called the Walled Garden. I founded this with my colleagues, Kai Whiting and Simon Drew, and we're having a lot of fun building community in a digital space with people who are bringing honest inquiry to their personal searches. The culture that we're building is really beautiful. And a little footnote to that is I'm uneasy in digital spaces, or at least I think I have a healthy skepticism of them, because I'm a big fan of non-digital culture, standing in front of people in 3 dimensions in all of our non-curated awkwardness, right? But so this was an interesting change for me, to try to see if we could do something worthwhile to bring people from all over the world together, and to see if we could really touch each other's minds and hearts in a way that would be worthwhile for all.
Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself as a Stoic, or would you prefer to describe yourself in another way?
I never object when people refer to me as such, because it's not that I'm not a Stoic, but I prefer to just think of myself as someone who is excited to learn from any good fount of wisdom, whether it be an ancient wisdom tradition or even somebody I'm standing in line with at the post office. I think wisdom is everywhere. And I get a little nervous when it's codified, because that tends to give rise to certain charismatic people can kind of take ownership of the narrative of a group. And there can be problems with unequal power, manipulation, and so on. Those are, I don't mean to be catastrophic in my thinking, but I just always like to keep my lance free.
Yeah, there's something to that. Labels movements like this are always good at bringing people together, but there's also the risk that you shut others out or become isolated in a way that particular individuals can take advantage of.
I think you're right, Caleb. Yeah. And certain people, when they feel that they have found something valuable, and of course there's the origin texts of Stoicism are treasure troves of terrific guidance that's just as relevant today as it was back in the day. People can start to overly identify with the ideas and start to sort people into the categories of, are you doing it correctly or incorrectly? I would rather be around a fool who is kind and lives well than someone who has all the answers or, yeah.
So one question that sort of gets at this issue of Stoicism and other life philosophies, if you will, is you talk about Stoicism having a broadly Eastern element. How do these two worlds, the ancient Greek and Roman philosophy and the more Eastern side of things, come together for you?
I see them both as contemplative traditions. Mind you, we're talking about a huge swath of wisdom and practices. But one of the things that first attracted me to Stoicism was that I had and continue to, for many, many years, I practiced Zen Buddhism, and the premium put on stillness, the value that can be found in stillness, I found elevated in Epictetus's discourses and in Marcus Aurelius's meditations. By stillness, I simply mean settling the mind so that you can see the world with clear eyes. Mm-hmm. I think both worlds put a high value on that.
Yeah, and seeing the world anew. It's always a good phrase. Yes. And it's useful to think of some parts of the project as clearing away your mind, if you will, so that it's easier to find what you're looking for.
Yes, there's so much there once we part the cloud.
That's right. There's also this connection, I think, that especially Marcus Aurelius talks a lot about the ephemeral nature of things, how things are moving in flux. And that ties quite a lot with other ideas about how things are interconnected, ephemeral, that you see in other traditions as well.
Indeed.
So in terms of your practice, if you will, is that something you think about as having a daily practice? Or I know others maybe they approach philosophy in a more intuitive and less systematic way. So how do you think about this issue?
For me personally, daily practice is essential. And I'll talk about the substantive part of that in a second. But it's the easiest thing in the world is to drift from one's own ideals and principles. Heaven knows not only the pace of modern life, but all of its claims, wanted and unwanted, on our attention make us almost inevitably very scattered, very fractured in our minds. I mean, I'm not, maybe you're thinking, tell me something I don't know. I mean, this is real. This is part of our lives. You receive a text and automatically you become this kind of passive responding machine. And even if you're bringing your own creativity to bear on your response, you're kind of tethered to the author of the text that came to you, for example, or the advertisement that's put in front of you. And so if we don't regularly bring ourselves back to order, so to say, again, stillness, that's kind of my keystone. It's really easy to just to get lost and to just live one's life in a posture of reactivity rather than creativity or proactivity. So what to do? Well, I don't prescribe any particular daily practice to other people because I think everyone is different and needs to find out what works for them best. But I think it's so valuable to create that narrative through line, diachronic across time, so that you have this strong cord, this like you can hold on to your rope, right? Of your principles, what matters the most. So what do I do every day? I happen to practice yoga every day. And I like it because it's a moving meditation. And when I'm done, my mind and my heart feel centered. And it's then that I read some source of wisdom. I often go to Stoic sources, but I look at all kinds of different things. And then rooted in all that, I then meet my day as best I can.
Is there a particular source of wisdom that you've been looking at lately?
I've been, I have a daughter who chose to be a rabbi, actually. Her father had been a Jesuit priest, and I was a secular Jew, and she decided to go into the rabbinate. And so she has been sharing a lot, but some very interesting Jewish sources with me that I've been enjoying. Particular Abraham Joshua Heschel, whose ideas I find to fit like a glove with some of the highest ideals of Stoicism, interestingly enough.
Yeah, that's a tradition that I know less about. At some point, hopefully that'll change. We had a fellow named Zohar Atkins, who is a rabbi and a philosopher and poet type, and we chat a little bit about that here as a part of this series, but it's still a tradition that I am woefully ignorant about. Yeah. There's so many. One thing that stuck out to me when I was reading your book, it was a line on seriousness. So something to the effect of spiritual progress requires us to highlight what is essential and pay less attention to what is trivial. which to me brought to mind the sort of virtue of seriousness over things like sensationalism or near-term gratification. Could you speak to that a little?
Yes, definitely. Well, seriousness implies judgment. It implies differentiation. It's not, as sometimes people will say, oh, it's all good. No, it's not all good. We kid ourselves that way. And in order to live a meaningful life, we necessarily have to make value judgments along the continuum of good, better, best, bad, worse, worst. And we have to bring those value judgments to bear on aesthetic choices, on spiritual choices, on practical choices, and on our moral choices. And I think part of becoming a serious person is embracing that discernment and that judgment, not being sanctimonious. We're not talking about that. I know when I was coming of age as a young person, the zeitgeist was, oh, don't be judgmental. Don't be so judgmental. But it's not all good. It's everything is not all good. If we're not making these micro judgments, then nothing means anything. So one of the things I love about Stoicism is it elbows you in the ribs and it says, stand up and be a grown-up. Decide what is good. Decide what is worthy. Mind you, keep an open mind. Keep learning. Don't assume that you know everything in a conclusive way. If we don't make these distinctions, then we're just bags of meat, just living by our basest instincts and just seeking gratification and avoiding discomfort. And that forsakes our dignity as human beings. And it also forsakes just the opportunity that ordering our lives through our values, not being abstract about them, but being very specific, that makes the world better for everyone when we know where we stand and our thoughts and our words and our deeds are congruent.
Yeah, there's a honesty in that, of course, in expressing one's judgment. I think often in some circles there might be some hesitation to express one's values in certain scenarios. Of course, there are maybe the opposite problem arises in other circles, but often I found that if you state what you think about something in a relatively clear manner without intending to antagonize someone, whether it's a practical judgment, political one, or aesthetic one, often one can have pretty reasonable conversations.
Yes, that's where I think, Caleb, that's where the excitement, where the connection begins, because it's not like you're trying to persuade someone else to be you or to see it your way. But if you show your cards, then you can talk, then you can learn, then you can listen.
Absolutely. One thing that also came to mind in that section is I've recently, as in last year, I read a book by a philosopher named Zena Hitz, who talks about Saint Augustine quite a bit. And Augustine had this distinction between curiositas and studiatas, which are two Latin words, which essentially just means curiosity as a vice and seriousness as a virtue. And so the kind of curiosity that he thought was vicious was the sort of thing that drove him to watch with some kind of perverse pleasure at gladiatorial games. There's something that sort of drives you to enjoy that sort of thing that is somewhat pernicious. And he contrasted that with the virtue of seriousness, which is aimed sort of directly at the value that you want to promote, or something of this sort. And there's always this risk that what we intend to do in a serious manner is maybe corrupted in some way, or we get distracted. So this, of course, connects back to your point about the daily routines, is that things like a daily routine keeps one headed on the path, as it were.
Yes.
Another thing that stuck out to me about your work is, of course, there's this issue of role models in Stoicism. So I was wondering about how you thought about finding role models, surrounding yourself with role models, or about this rather large topic in general.
That's a very important topic, I think, because we do need role models. I know I need role models. And at the same time, we have to keep our heads. I think we see how easily in our desire for heroes, we can forget that people are all too human, and we can be disappointed because we all know, say, someone who's a very gifted artist, say, in one discipline or another, but they're, maybe a very miserly person. There's this tendency, kind of weakness, I think, in us sometimes if we're not disciplined in our thinking, to think that if a person is good in category A, then they're also good in categories B, C, D, 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 D. And I know that I got broadsided many times, and found out people whom I had deeply admired actually had feet of clay, because as a young seeker, I was around many different spiritual leaders. And then I worked for many years in book publishing, working with some of the great thought leaders of the time, and people who, were considered kind of like spiritual rock stars in a way. And I knew them as authors, as people, and they were fragile, or they were mean, or they were a lot of things. So I think it's very important for us to realize, to kind of break down, well, what is it in a given person that we admire, and to just remind ourselves over and over again, so we don't subjugate ourselves or abnegate ourselves, because we're so dazzled by a person. We must remember that people have extraordinary gifts, extraordinary qualities, and they're also human. And the main thing is, it's always up to us in the end to decide how to be a good person, how to live a meaningful life. No one else can tell us ultimately those answers. And anyone who purports to do so, I would run away from very quickly.
Yeah, so it's a matter of clarifying what you value about the person and focusing on that, maybe what you can learn about that, and then being careful to not let that sort of permeate through every action or everything they do, such that you end up maybe missing the
Right.
mark, as it were.
Yes. And also, you don't want to see yourself as being less than them, because certainly there are people who are endowed with great gifts, and there are people who have developed certain abilities or ways of thinking that we may admire. But that's it. That's it. That's good, but that's it.
Yeah, you don't have to add anything else to that. It's
You don't have to add anything else to it. Yeah.
like the line that Epictetus says, of course, that, he went to jail. You don't have to add anything else to that. He went to jail and his life is ruined. No, it's just that he went to jail.
Right.
That's all.
Well said.
Something I am curious about that you probably have experience with is thinking about, like, once you're in the broadly spiritual, philosophical self-help game, as it were, how do you prevent yourself from being the kind of person who's someone might read your book and they think, wow, that's fantastic, and then they bump into you, as it were, and then it seems like some people get corrupted by some amount of fame, or they narrow down on particular parts of their work to the extent of other aspects of their life. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is just a statement of my particular temperament. I've had a front row seat to many illustrious minds and teachers who, when they suddenly get a lot of adulation or a lot of attention, they do get carried away with it, and it changes them for the worse. In my own case, over the years, I've gotten lots of people, fans, I guess you call them, have reached out to me, thank you for writing the book, or I've heard from a number of soldiers, particularly in Afghanistan, who used the art of living as a way to get through very dire circumstances. But when people have tried to endow me with some kind of special knowledge, it frightens me, and I want to straighten them out really fast, because I don't know anything that special that other people don't know. We all have specialized knowledge and experience just based on where we were placed in the world and whom we happen to come in contact with. And, certainly we all try to do our best work, but nobody, I don't know. I guess I'm just a real populist. I don't believe that anyone carries any special. Well, no, I was about to say I don't believe anyone carries special knowledge. I do, but not total special knowledge.
Yeah, it goes back to, at least this is how I'm inclined to think about it, and you can push back if you think a little bit differently. But I think some people, in fact, do have special knowledge. They have insight that they can share with others, either from their experience or natural talents, whatever it may be. Some people are, in some sense, better than others at certain activities or domains. And then one gets into trouble when, better than others at these domains just becomes better than others or something of that sort. And that's, I think, where one starts to make mistakes.
Right. We always have to, I think, turn back to ourselves and just ask ourselves in any given moment, and who was it I wanted to be? Well, what do I need to do to be that person? Make that micro adjustment right here, right now, within the life I'm living, not someone else's circumstance. We always have to return to ourselves. I don't mean return to our ego, but just return to this. I'm at a loss for words for a minute, Caleb. I guess just to return to ourselves. What do I have to give?
Mm-hmm.
How can I be of use?
Yeah, I think everyone probably knows more about their own life than any guru or philosophical teacher, in a way, I suppose.
Amen.
Something that I've noticed that you've probably come across as well is that occasionally people will reach out to you about your work. They'll say it's about something, how impactful a Stoa is, and how much they've learned about Stoa, and they detail this situation where I've gone through these sorts of tragedies and I've made these changes to my life, and I think, why are you thanking me when it seems like you're the sort of person who I should be learning from, right? They've come through all these obstacles.
Exactly.
So their roles should really, really be reversed
right.
in a way.
I couldn't agree more, because they had to do the work. They're the ones who did the work. Because any kind of, call it a spiritual change, call it a personal or psychological change, it's never convenient. It's never easy. Any valuable change, you have put upon you have to exert yourself, and that's different than just reading some words on a page, which can inspire you, to be sure. Inspiration is wonderful, but the only thing that's real is the actions you take in the world, or the actions you refrain from taking in the world. The things you say, or the things you refrain from saying,
mm-hmm.
and so on.
So how do you think about shaping or how someone should think about shaping one's desires so that they focus maybe more on the person who they want to be, less on perhaps other situations, and focus less on things like competition or status or
Yes.
whatever it may be, and more on, as the Stoics would say, virtue?
That's a wonderful question. It does, I think, make us circle back to the idea of, call it daily practice or daily checking in with ourselves. I think we have to over and over and over and over and over and over again point our attention simply towards the question, who was it I wanted to be? Oh, yeah. What do I need to do then? Very simple questions, but we have to return to it over and over again. And when we do, and when we make a habit of returning to that question, who was it I wanted to be? The how of it, the what we need to do, that'll change each time, because like you mentioned earlier in the podcast, the Stoic and the broad Eastern observation that life is ephemeral. It's just baked into life. Life will always be changing. And given that, we always have to change our approach. But we can keep returning to, who was it I wanted to be? And to say it to yourself, I want to be an honest person. That means I don't want to lie. I want to tell the truth today. I want to tell the truth today. Just simple, not necessarily easy, but simple. repetition.
Yeah, a lot of these things are simple, but as you said, that doesn't make it easy, of course.
Right. And especially because we aren't getting regular reinforcement from the broad culture. If we just allow ourselves to be buffeted by what's going on around us, it's pretty easy to fall into that. Hey, you want to go to the game? Hey, just, yeah, you just have to gather yourself over and over. What kind of person do I want to be? I want to be someone who gives. Well, how can I give today? Specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Again and again, return to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I know some people find value out of repeatedly asking questions like that, or memorizing particular mantras, or using
Right.
maybe physical situations as a trigger. Whenever you look in the mirror, then you sort of check in, or whenever you get home and open some door, then you just check in.
Right. Yeah, I think those are excellent mnemonics. And they're also kind of piggybacking on what you just said, Caleb, is that wonderful Stoic idea of memento, more, we have to remember we're going to die. That's real. There's going to come a time when, the off switch is going to go off. And so what are you going to do with this time you've been inexplicably given when the on switch is still on? What do you want your life to stand for?
Yeah, that's right. It's easy to act as though one will live for 10,000 years, but it is not so.
Yeah. It's just not so. It's just not so.
What do you think you've learned about fostering community from your work with Simon and Kai on the walled garden?
It's been one of, this is not an overstatement. It's been one of the greatest gifts of my life to work with them, because fundamentally I'm an introvert. I do most of my work both as a writer and speaker collaterally, and as a musician. I'm by myself most of the time, and I enjoy my own company. But these colleagues, we found each other. We're all from different countries, very different walks of life. And yet there are ways that we want the same thing. And to be in that kind of a mutually supportive community, I wish that for everyone. Yeah, regardless of whether you have a philosophical bent or not, I've been reminded by the beauty of this colleagueship that we are fundamentally social animals, and we need to be in dialogue with other people. Otherwise, we will just start running around in our own heads. And sometimes running around in our own heads can create a symphony or create something quite beautiful. But there's a point where you can get lost too. And there's so much magic that can happen between people coming together, goodwill. It's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think in a way that's what organized religion excels at, is creating community. Some people like to be part of organized religion. Some people don't. Some people don't want dogma. But I think we can follow that model of churches and mosques and synagogues, and how they take these are groups of people who, when you get sick, the casseroles come. People take care of each other, and we need that. God knows we need that.
Yeah, that's right. When my mother's family moved here from South Africa, and they essentially found a church, and as soon as they had found that church, there were people showing up, helping them move, bringing them any extra furniture they had, helping them out with meals. And that absolutely is a benefit of communities.
Yeah, they've really gotten that one right.
And how do you think we can, in the non-religious context, or even slightly harder challenges in the digital world, attempt to approximate the same thing? Or perhaps that's not the right question. Maybe we should be thinking about not approximating what religions have done in the physical world, but creating something new. How do you think about that?
Well, I do understand the spirit of your question, and it's such an important question because in the digital world, of course, there's so much opportunity for dissimulation. In other words, for not really coming as you are, but perhaps hiding behind an avatar, or somehow focusing on the presentation of self over much. And yet, this is a huge and growing part of what it means to be a human being on this planet right now. And so I don't have any particular road-tested answers to this question, but I think this is something we must keep thinking about. What am I talking about? Just being real with people, whether being real with ourselves. I think the more we work on ourselves, then we can bring our real selves. I'm not talking about reckless self-disclosure, but
Sure.
simply not posing, not posturing, not, doing apps that take the dark circles from under your eyes. If you've got dark circles under your eyes, you earned them. I mean that metaphorically, but I also mean it literally. We must be real. I think that can be our individual contribution towards building community in digital spaces. But I also think we need to stay strongly anchored in our local communities to find common cause with the people around us, to work on social justice projects, or just all the small but important ways that we can fine-tune the life that we are physically in.
Yeah, I think it's a question I often get is about which Stoic groups to join or create, and I don't always have a good answer. One is just because people's situations are different, but I know it's certainly difficult to create a rich online community. So what your remark makes me think of is perhaps one way to do it is simply by being more real, as you said, or being clear about what this community is doing. This is what we're up to, and if this aligns with what you are up to, you should join. If not, maybe there are other communities that you could join or that you can start, and there's something can be something useful about that.
Yes. Do you have any further thoughts about that?
On creating community?
Yeah. Or even half-baked ideas.
I think that often I think that people, when they ask this question, are sometimes more willing to join communities than foster them. And the fact of the matter is, you need to do quite a bit of work for a community to go well. I think, especially
Yes.
when they're in the digital sphere, even when they're not in the digital sphere. And that can be really quite simple things, from if it's a Stoic meeting group to offering to lead a discussion on a particular passage, or just ensuring that there is in fact a next time that the group will meet. So I think doing these sorts of things shouldn't be underrated.
I like your distinction between fostering the community and merely joining. It's very important. Yes. Someone once said to me, and you always have much more fun at the party if you help decorate the gym.
Yeah, that's a good line. Yeah, if I think about the religious context, there's the fact that my mother's family was able to move here and get so much help works, is that there's this expectation that when the next family comes, her family would be right along everyone else and offer their time and their resources.
Yes.
I think these groups can work well in physical spaces because often exit is harder. It's harder to not show up to church, especially if you're in a smaller town. You will bump into someone who asks,
You're right about that. Where were you?
Yeah, where were you on Sunday? I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah.
And one benefit of the digital world is it makes it easy to leave from negative communities, but there's a cost there where I think people almost have too much optionality. There's too many choices. And
well said. Yes.
Yeah, so there's something to committing to what you have, even if it may not be perfect. There's probably a mistake people make in a number of domains of their life is hoping for, now in this world where there's so many choices, so much more optionality, hoping for the perfect partner, perfect job, or when at some point you need to commit and make that job the best job you can have, or make the relationship work, or something like this. One of my favorite essays is written by a fellow named Byrne Hobart called "Against Optionality." So if someone's listening and wants to follow up on that theme, it's an essay I like quite a lot. It revolves around.
I look forward to reading that.
It revolves around his experience dating and his marriage. It's a both abstract and concrete piece.
Yes.
What's the significance of the garden being walled?
Because anything of value has to be contained and defined. We have to say, we have to embrace the thing we're doing. This actually dovetails, I think, Caleb, with what you just said about optionality. It's not seeing the world as an undifferentiated field, but selecting and enclosing, not as a fortress against the outside world, but to simply say, this is us, and we're talking about this, that, and the other, and this matters. So it's like, it's almost like a kind of what's the word? Like a sacralization, like making something
consecrating, almost.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good word for it. Right. That's how I think of it. I know that the image of the walled garden has a lot of historic and mythic significance, but it's kind of above my pay grade to talk about all that.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add, Sharon?
I guess the only thing I was going to say is because I was really hooked in by this idea of against optionality. I think one of the greatest nuggets that I took away from Stoicism in general and in writing my book, The Art of Living, is simply that reminder that it's much better to live an inch wide and a mile deep than a mile wide and an inch deep. In other words, when we commit and drill down into something, when we simply just decide, this is the person I'm going to love, warts and all, and I'm all in, amazing things happen. That's where meaningfulness in life happens. When we dare to care about something, the craftsmanship comes from that drilling down, that value of narrowing one's options and then fully entering them. That's all.
Excellent. Very well said.
What a joy to talk to you.
Thanks so much for coming.